I never should have come to Blackwater Cove. That thought clung to my mind like the thick, salty mist that rolled in from the ocean, wrapping the village in a shroud of eerie silence. The place had an unsettling stillness, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to disappear. I arrived just before sunset, the sky a bruised mix of purple and orange, casting long, distorted shadows across the narrow cobbled paths. The village was smaller than I had expected, just a scattering of weather-worn cottages huddled together as if seeking warmth against the cold sea wind. The only signs of life were a few old fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, their ropes creaking softly, as though whispering secrets to the tide. I had come here on assignment, an investigative journalist chasing yet another ghost story. Disappearances in an isolated fishing village? It sounded like something ripped straight from an old sailor's folktale, the kind of thing drunk fishermen tell newcomers to keep them from venturing too far into the fog. But the reports had been real. Over the past 5 years, 13 people had vanished without a trace. Fishermen, travelers, even a local boy who had wandered too close to the cliffs. No bodies, no clues, just the chilling silence of an unanswered question. I checked into the only inn in the village, a rickety wooden structure with paint peeling from its walls. The innkeeper, a wiry old man with sunken eyes and a permanent frown, barely spoke as he handed me the key to my room. His fingers, gnarled like driftwood, trembled slightly as he did so. "You shouldn't stay long," he muttered under his breath before turning away. At dinner, I tried to talk to the locals. There were only a handful of them gathered in the dimly lit tavern, their faces hollowed by years of hardship and something else, something darker. They avoided my questions, their eyes darting toward the windows whenever I mentioned the disappearances. One old woman, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of steaming broth, finally spoke up. "The sea takes what it's owed," she said in a hushed, almost reverent tone. "Always has, always will." When I pressed for more, she simply shook her head and refused to say another word. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the village seemed unnaturally quiet. No distant chatter, no sounds of the tide crashing against the rocks, just an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. Then, just as I was drifting into uneasy sleep, I heard it. A low, hollow sound, like a deep moan carried on the wind. It wasn't the sea. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. And it was coming from the cliffs. The sound dragged me from sleep like a hook lodged deep in my ribs. I sat up, heart pounding, ears straining against the silence that followed. For a moment I thought I had imagined it. Maybe just the wind shifting through the narrow alleyways of the village, twisting itself into something unnatural. But then it came again. Long, drawn out, a hollow wail rising from the cliffs. I pulled on my jacket, ignoring the cold bite of the wooden floor beneath my bare feet, and reached for my flashlight. The inn was deathly quiet, the air thick with something I couldn't name. As I stepped into the hallway, the floorboards groaned under my weight, but no doors creaked open, no whispers of life stirred behind them. It felt as though I was the only one left in the building, or maybe even the village itself. The streets were deserted, lit only by the weak glow of the moon filtering through the fog. The fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor, their hulls bumping against the docks in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The village should have felt peaceful at this hour, but it didn't. Something was wrong, As I made my way toward the cliffs, the mist thickened, curling around me like grasping fingers. Every few steps I had to stop and listen, convinced I heard the shuffle of footsteps just behind me. When I turned, there was nothing. Only the empty street, the distant crash of waves, and the ever-present feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I saw it. Near the edge of the cliff, a figure stood motionless, staring out at the water. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. Tall, unmoving, a dark shape against the silver glow of the ocean. My pulse hammered as I lifted my flashlight, the beam slicing through the mist. The figure was gone. I swallowed hard, the breath in my lungs suddenly feeling too thick. Had I imagined it, a trick of the fog? But my instinct screamed otherwise. I wasn't alone out here. Something was watching me. A splash sounded from below, deep and heavy, as though something massive had broken the surface of the water. I stepped closer to the edge, peering down. The waves churned, darker than they should have been, as if something huge moved beneath them. I scanned the shore below, expecting to see a fisherman or perhaps a stray animal, but instead, something else caught my eye. Footprints. They led from the edge of the cliff back toward the village. Bare, human prints in the damp earth, their edges softening under the creeping mist. My breath hitched. They hadn't been there before. I followed them, my heart hammering with every step. The tracks wound through the narrow paths, past shuttered cottages and abandoned market stalls. They stopped abruptly outside a small house near the outskirts of the village. The door was slightly ajar, swaying with the wind. I hesitated, every rational part of my brain screaming at me to turn back, to return to the safety of my room and pretend I had never seen any of this. But I had come here for answers, and something inside me knew I was close. I pushed the door open. The house was dark, but the air inside was thick with the scent of salt and decay. My flashlight swept across the walls, revealing peeling wallpaper, overturned furniture, and deep scratches along the wooden floor. Then I saw them. Photos, scattered across the floor, pinned to the walls, black and white images of the missing. Faces frozen in time, their eyes hollow, staring. Some of the photos were old, edges curled and yellowed, but others were recent, too recent. My fingers trembled as I reached down, picking up one from the pile. It was me. My own face stared back at me from the glossy surface, the timestamp in the corner marking the photo as taken only hours ago. The air shifted. A slow creak echoed from deeper within the house. I wasn't alone. You said the creak came again, a slow, deliberate sound, as if someone or something was shifting just beyond the flashlight's reach. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the photo. The timestamp glowed in the dim light. Taken at 2:47 a.m. That was only minutes ago. A wave of nausea rolled through me as my mind struggled to grasp the impossibility of it. Who had taken this? How had they gotten so close without me noticing? The air in the house felt heavier, charged with something unseen, something that didn't belong in the world I understood. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling as I swept the beam across the ruined room. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, moving in ways that had nothing to do with the light. The house felt alive, breathing, watching. Then, from the darkness ahead, a voice, a whisper. My name. I froze, every muscle locking in place. It hadn't come from outside. It hadn't even come from another room. It had come from right beside me. The flashlight flickered, and in that brief stutter of light, I saw something. A face, pale and waterlogged, eyes sunken yet impossibly wide, staring at me from just inches away. But before I could scream, before I could even process what I was seeing, the light died completely. The darkness swallowed everything. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The whispering didn't stop. It grew, multiplying, filling the space with overlapping voices, each calling my name in a hushed, desperate tone. Cold fingers brushed against my arm. I ran. I didn't look back. I just bolted through the open door, nearly tripping over the threshold. The mist outside had thickened into an impenetrable wall, but I didn't care. Anything was better than that house. But as I sprinted back toward the village, I realized something was wrong. The buildings looked different, more run down, more decayed, as if years had passed in the few minutes I had been inside. Windows gaped open like empty sockets, and the fishing boats in the harbor were nothing but rotting husks. The village was wrong. I skidded to a halt, gasping for breath. The whispering hadn't stopped. It was all around me now, seeping from the walls, the ground, even the mist itself. And then I saw them. Figures emerging from the fog, their shapes flickering, shifting there, then gone, then closer. They moved without sound, their feet never touching the ground. Some were missing parts of their faces. Others had hollow voids where their eyes should have been. I recognized them. The missing, one of them stepped forward, its mouth opening too wide, its jaw unhinging with a sickening crack. The whispering became deafening. A dozen voices, 100, all speaking at once. "You are not supposed to be here." Something yanked at my wrist, hard. I spun, expecting to see another apparition. But instead, I found myself staring into the terrified eyes of the old woman from the tavern. Her grip was iron, her nails digging into my skin as she dragged me backward. "Run," she hissed, "before they take you too." The old woman's grip was stronger than it should have been for someone her age. She pulled me through the mist, her movements frantic yet precise, as if she knew exactly where to go. Behind us, the whispering turned into a low, guttural wail, like 100 voices crying out in agony at once. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. I could feel them getting closer. The air around us thickened, pressing in from all sides. My chest tightened, my legs burned, but the woman didn't slow down. We weaved through the abandoned village, past buildings that now looked skeletal, their walls caved in, as if something had eaten away at them. The boats in the harbor were gone, the water an endless void of blackness. It felt like we were running through a place that had already been erased, like the village itself was dying around us. Then suddenly, she stopped. We stood before a well, ancient, covered in moss, its stones slick with moisture. The wailing behind us grew louder, the fog swirling violently. I finally turned. They were there. A mass of figures shifting, stretching, their faces twisted in expressions of torment. Some were familiar. I had seen them in the photos, the missing ones, their hollow eyes locked onto me. But others were wrong. Their bodies flickered as if they weren't fully real, as if they were caught between this world and something else. The old woman grabbed my face, forcing me to look at her. "You must listen," she said, her breath ragged. "They want to take you, to make you one of them, but you still have a choice." My mind was spinning. What do I do? Her fingers tightened on my arm. The well. It is the only way out. I looked at the dark opening. A deep, endless void. I hesitated. The figures moved closer. I could see their mouths now. Open, gaping too wide. As if screaming. Yet no sound escaped. Their arms stretched, reaching for me. Jump! The woman shrieked. Cold fingers brushed my neck. My body tensed in sheer terror. I jumped. The world tilted. And for a moment, there was nothing but weightlessness. The darkness of the well swallowed me whole. And I fell, deeper and deeper, the air rushing past me in a deafening roar. Then I gasped, choking, my body jerking upright. I was back. The village was normal again. The mist had lifted. The boats were in the harbor, and the houses were intact. The sky was turning a pale shade of dawn. It was as if nothing had happened. But the well was gone. I staggered to my feet, my head spinning. Had it all been a nightmare? Some fevered hallucination? Then I felt it. A wet handprint on my wrist, cold, faint, as if someone, something, had tried to pull me back. I left that village and never returned. But even now, when the nights are quiet, I still hear the whispering. And I know I was never supposed to leave.